bottles of water. "I brought food," he said. "Real food." He placed everything on the floor and stepped back, keeping a good distance so they wouldn't feel cornered. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of the younger girls, staring at the sandwiches like she'd never seen anything so inviting, slowly crawled forward. She looked at Lena, silently asking permission. Lena gave a small nod. The girl grabbed one of the sandwiches and took a careful bite. Her face softened instantly. "It's warm," she whispered. A moment later, the other children moved too, grabbing food like they were afraid it might disappear. But they didn't fight or shove. They were gentle, quiet, practiced. It was clear this wasn't the first time they had eaten too little. Daniel watched the scene with an ache in his chest. He tried not to stare too long at their clothes too thin for winter war, the blankets that barely covered them. He tried not to imagine how many nights they had slept on the cold floor. Everything inside him wanted to rush forward, wrap them in coats, drive them far away from this place. But he held himself back. He knew moving too fast might break the fragile trust forming between them. Lena didn't go for the food right away. She waited until every child had something in their hands. Then she took one small sandwich from what was left. She didn't eat it, though. She tore it in half and gave it to the smallest boy, who had been sitting close to her leg. "You should eat too," Daniel said gently. "I will," she replied. But she didn't. He could see her eyes scanning the room, checking each sibling, counting every head, making sure everyone was safe, before she even thought about herself. She was teenage by age, but adult by responsibility. "Lena," he said quietly, "may I ask you something?" She looked up, guarded again. "What is it?" "How long have you been here?" She shifted her feet slightly, like the question made her uncomfortable. "Long enough." He didn't push. Instead, he asked, "Is there anyone helping you? Anyone who knows where you all are?" Her lips pressed together in a thin line. She shook her head. "Nobody." The word hit him harder than he expected. He took a breath, thinking carefully about what to say next. "I'd like to help you. All of you. But I won't do anything unless you want me to." Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. She studied him, trying to read his intentions. She had clearly been failed by adults before, failed enough times to assume anyone offering help wanted something in return. "What kind of help?" she asked. "Warm clothes. A safe place to stay. Food every day. No catches. No one taking you away from your brothers and sisters." She didn't respond right away. Her gaze flicked down to the little boy leaning against her. Then she looked at the girl who had eaten her sandwich in tiny, careful bites, as if making it last longer. She looked at the older boy who sat with his back against the wall, acting tough but hiding how cold he really was. Finally, she said, "People say that, but they don't mean it." Daniel nodded. "I understand why you'd feel that way." He took a slow breath. "If you want, I can call someone from the city who can help right now. Not police. Not anything scary. Just people who make sure kids are safe and warm. You can stay with your family. You can stay together. I won't let anyone split you up. I'll make sure of it." Lena crossed her arms over her chest, thinking deeply. She didn't trust Isliane for good reason. She had spent too long surviving without anyone to rely on. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" she asked. "You don't," he admitted, "but I hope you'll let me prove it." His honesty seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked slowly, looking down at the cracked floor. Then, for the first time since he arrived, she let herself sit down. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Why us?" He didn't answer right away. He looked around the room at the worn blankets, the empty shelves, the small pile of things they had collected. Then he looked at her. "Because you remind me of someone I knew when I was young," he said. "Someone strong. Someone who had nothing but still cared more about others than herself. I couldn't help them back then. But maybe I can help you now." Lena didn't respond, but he saw her expression soften just a little. A small boy tugged at her sleeve again. "Is he bad?" the boy whispered, glancing at Daniel. Lena shook her head. "I don't think so," she whispered back. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest at her words. He took out his phone but didn't dial yet. "I'll call a group I trust." They help families like yours. They're gentle, and they don't take kids away unless someone is in danger. And you all are safest when you're together." Lena stared at the floor, thinking. The weight of her decision pressed down on her shoulders. She was deciding not only for herself, but for everyone in the room. After nearly a full minute, she whispered, "Okay, but I stay with them." "You will," he promised. He stepped away and made the call. His voice stayed low, calm, explaining just enough without giving away details that might scare the children. When he hung up, he returned to them. "They're coming," he said. "They'll bring warm blankets, real food, and a van to take you somewhere safe. You can all stay together tonight." "What?" one of the older boys asked. "Do we have to talk to them?" "Only if you want to," Daniel said. "Lena can speak for everyone if that feels safer." The children seemed relieved. They leaned against one another, still cautious but not terrified. Minutes passed slowly. Daniel stayed near the door so he wouldn't feel like a threat. He kept his coat open so they could see he wasn't hiding anything. He even took a seat on the cold floor, showing he wasn't above them. Wasn't in control, just present. When the help finally arrived, it came quietly. Two gentle-looking workers approached with soft voices, wearing warm jackets and careful smiles. They carried blankets, big bags of food, and a soft reassurance in their tone. Lena stood immediately, placing herself between the workers and her siblings again. But she didn't look as frightened as before. Daniel stepped beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her. "These are good people," he said softly. "They're here because I asked them to help, not to take anyone away. You're still in charge." The workers smiled and introduced themselves one at a time, speaking to Lena with respect, not pity. They let her check the blankets herself before accepting them. They let her distribute the food. They let her decide where the siblings sat and who needed the warmest layers. Slowly, the tension in the room began to ease. Daniel watched as the children wrapped themselves in clean blankets. He noticed how Lena kept glancing at him as if making sure he hadn't disappeared. He made sure he didn't look away for more than a second, letting her know he was still there. Still keeping his promise? When the workers gently asked Lena if she would like to come with them to a warm place for the night, she looked at her siblings first. Each one nodded almost instantly. They trusted her. They followed her lead. "Okay," she said quietly. "But we all go together," as the worker assured. All together, they helped the children stand, wrapping each one carefully. Daniel held the door as they walked out, watching each small face pass by. Each sibling holding on to another lied. Lena was the last to walk out. She paused beside him. "You kept your word," she said softly. "I will keep the rest of them too," he replied, for the first time. Lena gave him a tiny, tired smile as the children were led into the warm van waiting outside. Daniel felt a strange mix of relief and responsibility settle over him. The night wasn't over. The problems weren't gone. But tonight, at least, the children were safe. And he wasn't going to stop until their lives changed for good. The morning lights slipped through the thin curtains of the small community shelter room, warming the quiet faces of the children who were still asleep. For the first time in a long while, they lay on soft mattresses instead of cold concrete. Their breathing was calm, steady, peaceful. The workers had put extra blankets on them during the night. Just to make sure they stayed warm, Lena sat on the edge of her bed watching them with tired but relieved eyes. Her hair was brushed now, her clothes were clean, and her hands no longer felt numb from the cold. She still looked worn, as if she hadn't slept enough, but there was something different about her. A small softness, a little less fear in her shoulders. She didn't know how long she'd been awake. Long enough to watch the sunrise, long enough to think about everything that had happened. She wasn't used to letting someone else help. Part of her still didn't believe any of this was real. A quiet knock came at the door. Lena stood up quickly, ready to protect her siblings if needed. Old habits didn't disappear overnight. When the door opened slowly, it was Daniel standing there, holding a tray with warm breakfast plates balanced carefully. He offered a gentle smile. "Good morning. I brought food. I didn't know if you would want to wake the kids yet, so I thought I'd check first." Lena relaxed just slightly. "They're still tired," she said. He set the tray on a table near her. That's okay. Let them sleep. There's more in the kitchen when they're ready. She nodded politely, unsure what to say. Gratitude didn't come easily to her because life had never given her much to be grateful for, not until now. I wanted to talk to you about something, Daniel continued, his tone soft so he wouldn't wake the children. It's nothing scary, just plans for today. Lena crossed her arms, more out of habit than distrust. What plans? Well, he said gently, pulling up a chair but not sitting until she nodded her approval.
Oh.
The staff here want to help you and your... The evening air was cold enough to make people walk faster, their shoulders hunched and hands buried deep in their pockets. Street lights flickered along the sidewalk, and warm yellow light spilled from the windows of a fancy restaurant on the corner. Inside, people laughed. Forks clicked against plates, and the smell of rich food drifted out every time the door opened. But outside, standing just a few steps from the doorway, a thin girl waited quietly. She didn't look older than 17. Her clothes were worn but clean, her shoes a little too loose, and her dark hair tied back in a simple knot. Her eyes, soft and tired, kept watching the people leaving the restaurant. She wasn't pushy. She didn't hold a sign. She didn't stretch out her hands. Instead, she simply waited, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke. Excuse me? If you aren't going to finish that, may I take it? Most people passed without hearing her. A few glanced at her and kept walking, pretending they were busy. Some gave her the polite but distant smile people used when they didn't want to get involved. She didn't seem offended. She just stepped back, letting them go, her gaze settling again on the restaurant door. When a couple walked out carrying a leftover bag, the girl approached gently. There was nothing desperate or demanding in her. She asked with quiet respect, as though she already expected them to say no. Hi. If it's okay, could I please have that? The woman holding the bag hesitated, then handed it over with a small nod. The girl smiled, grateful, and thanked her sincerely. The couple walked off quickly, not looking back. The girl held the small paper bag carefully, out almost protectively as she stepped away from the doorway. Her hands were cold, but she cradled the food as though it were something fragile. She didn't open it. She didn't take a bite. She simply wrapped both hands around it and held it close. A few feet away, a man stood near a parked car, pulling on gloves. He looked like someone who belonged to the world inside the restaurant. Clean coat, polished shoes, calm posture. His face was familiar to many people. He was known for building companies, giving interviews, and appearing in magazines. But tonight, he wasn't surrounded by cameras or staff. He had stepped out alone, hoping for a quiet moment. He noticed the girl the moment he left the restaurant. Something about her patience caught his attention. She wasn't begging loudly. She wasn't demanding anything. She wasn't even trying to look pitiful. She simply stood there as though she had accepted the world for what it was. He watched her for a minute, curious. He had seen people beg before, but not like this. He had seen people fight over dropped food, but she wasn't fighting. He had seen people plead, cry, or shout, but she wasn't doing any of that. She waited politely, spoke gently, and walked away with the same quiet dignity, no matter how people responded. Something didn't match. She looked too young to be alone, too responsible in the way she handled the small bag. Too calm, as if she'd been doing this for a long time, he reached his car door, but paused, his hand hovering over the handle. Why didn't she eat any of it? The girl walked down the street, moving with quick but careful steps. The man found himself watching her instead of getting into his car. He didn't plan to get involved. He had no reason to. But the longer he watched her cling to that small bag of food, the more uneasy he felt. People like him lived in warm homes, took hot showers, and ordered full meals without thinking twice. People like her shouldn't be outside in the cold. Looking grateful for someone else's scraps, he took a slow breath and followed at a distance. He wasn't sure why he was doing it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe guilt. Maybe something deeper he didn't want to admit. But he kept his steps quiet, giving her space, letting her lead the way. The girl crossed the street and turned down a busy sidewalk. Cars rushed past, horns honking. The smells of roasted nuts from a street vendor mixed with traffic fumes. People brushed past her, not noticing her at all. She walked with her head slightly lowered, not out of shame, but focus, as though she had one clear goal and nothing else mattered. She stopped at a small bench near a bus stop, but only for a moment. A stray dog approached her, its ribs showing through its thin fur. It wagged its tail cautiously. The girl crouched down, set the leftover bag gently on her lap, and tore a tiny piece of bread from inside. She fed it to the dog with a soft smile. "There you go, buddy," she whispered. The man froze where he stood. She wasn't eating any of it. She wasn't even checking what was inside. And yet she shared a piece with a stray, as if she had plenty. He moved a little closer, leaning on a lamppost as though he were checking his phone. In truth, he watched her with a growing knot in his chest. After feeding the dog, she stood up again, still holding the bag tightly. She whispered something to the animal, maybe goodbye, maybe something like a promise, and continued walking. The sun had already set, and the temperature was dropping quickly. Her breath came out in faint clouds. Her steps grew a little faster, as though she needed to reach somewhere before it got colder. The man followed her through a series of quieter streets, farther from shops and bright lights. He wasn't used to walking through these areas, but he kept going, his curiosity turning slowly into concern. Finally, she reached a bus stop at the edge of the city. The schedules taped to the glass were old, curling at the edges. Only a few people stood around, workers heading home, an older woman holding a shopping bag, and a teenager with headphones in. The girl sat at the far end of the bench, hugging the bag close. She didn't talk to anyone. She didn't look around nervously. She simply waited. A bus rolled up with squealing brakes. People stepped on quickly. The girl waited until everyone else had boarded, then climbed on with careful steps. She tapped a worn bus card, one that looked like it had been reloaded many times but was almost ready to fall apart. The man stepped closer, but didn't get on. Not yet. Instead, he memorized the bus number and route. Then he watched as the doors closed and the vehicle pulled away. He stood there for a moment, unsure of his next move. He had meetings tomorrow, a stack of documents waiting at home, plans, responsibilities, a life built around schedules and expectations. But something about that girl's quiet struggle reached into his chest and refused to let go. He pulled out his phone and checked the bus. Scheduled another bus on the same route was coming in 5 minutes. He hesitated only for a second before he decided. He stepped forward and waited for the next bus, feeling strangely nervous, as though he were about to enter a story he hadn't prepared for. When the bus arrived, he boarded, sat near the back, and stared out the window as the city lights blurred by. He kept track of every stop, looking for the girl. Part of him felt guilty for following her, but another part insisted that there must be a reason he felt drawn to her story. After several stops, he finally saw her. She stepped off the bus and began walking down a dim road lined with old fences and empty lots. The man got off at the next stop and followed from a distance, careful not to scare her. The farther she walked, the more uneasy he felt. The neighborhood grew darker, quieter. Stores were replaced by boarded-up buildings. Streetlights spaced too far apart cast only faint pools of light on the cracked pavement. Through all of this, the girl kept walking with determination, her shoulders squared. The bag of food still clutched safely against her chest. She slowed down as she reached a tall wire fence behind what looked like an abandoned warehouse. To anyone else, the place would seem lifeless, but she slipped through a narrow opening in the fence, as though she'd done it many times. The man stopped several feet away, hidden behind a tree. His breath caught in his throat. What could she possibly be doing here? Why wasn't she taking the food for herself? Why was a girl her age returning to a place like that? For several long seconds, he considered turning back, convincing himself that it wasn't his business. But the memory of the dog eating from her hand, her quiet voice asking for scraps, and the determined way she clutched the small bag kept echoing in his mind. He stepped closer to the fence. The faint sound of voices drifted out, small voices. young voices filled with hope and relief. His heart thudded hard in his chest. He wasn't ready for what he was about to see, not even close. And yet, something told him this moment would change everything. He touched the edge of the fence opening, took a slow breath, and prepared to follow her inside. The bus stop behind him was now far away, and the night felt heavier as he stood at the edge of the broken fence. Cold wind brushed through the empty lot, carrying the smell of rust and damp concrete. He hesitated, wondering if he was going too far. If following her like this was crossing some invisible line he shouldn't step over. But something about the girl's quiet strength pulled him forward, and before he could talk himself out of it, he slipped through the narrow opening in the fence. Inside, the ground was uneven, covered with old tire marks and scattered pieces of broken wood. The building ahead looked worn down with cracked walls and boarded windows. But faint light glowed from within, soft and warm, like a candle. He followed the sound of voices, keeping his steps light, not wanting to scare anyone. As he got closer, he recognized the girl's voice. She was speaking softly, gently, the way a parent might speak to a child. Then came the response little voices, filled with relief and excitement. They sounded young. Far too young to be living in a place like this. He moved closer and pressed himself against the wall beside a half-open door. Inside, he could hear movements, someone shifting, someone laughing quietly, someone asking questions. He waited, listening, unsure whether to go in or turn back. The girl's voice came again. "I'm back. I got something today. Not much, but it should help." She sounded tired, but there was determination underneath it. A kind of strength that came from having no choice but to keep going. He slowly leaned forward. Peeking through the doorway, he froze. Inside the dim room were 7 children, all younger than the girl. The oldest looked maybe 12, the youngest barely old enough to walk. They were bundled in mismatched blankets, sitting around a small lantern that flickered weakly. Their eyes were wide with hope as they watched the girl open the paper bag. She took out the leftovers and divided them carefully, almost like she was handling treasure. She tore bread into equal pieces and made sure each child got the same amount. Her movements were slow and thoughtful, as though she had done this many times. Each child thanked her quietly. No one complained. No one grabbed more than their share. They ate with such gratitude that the man felt something twist painfully in his chest. The girl didn't take any piece for herself. She sat back and simply watched the younger ones eat. Her expression, soft but tired. She pulled a thin blanket around her shoulders, trying to hide her shivering. The room had no heater. The windows were broken. The walls were covered with old sheets to block the wind. The man stepped back from the door, his heart pounding. He had expected something bad, but not this. Not a group of children living alone. Not a girl trying to raise them. Not this silent, heartbreaking struggle. He took a moment to steady himself. He didn't want to rush in and scare them. He didn't want to make her think he was there for the wrong reason. So he waited, letting the voices inside drift out. One of the children asked, "Did you eat today?" The girl smiled faintly. "I'm okay. I had something earlier." But the man had followed her long enough to know she hadn't eaten anything. He had seen her give the stray dog a piece of bread, but not once had she taken a bite for herself. Another child spoke. "Tomorrow. Will we have food again?" The girl's smile didn't fade, but her eyes lowered. "I'll try. I'll find something. I always do, right?" The children nodded, trusting her completely. The man felt his throat tighten. How long had they been living like this? How long had she been carrying all the responsibility on her small shoulders? He wanted to help, but he didn't know how to enter without frightening them. He didn't want them to think he was there to cause trouble. He stepped back again, his mind racing. He could leave and call for help, but if he left now, they might slip away and no one would know where they had gone. And something told him the girl didn't trust easily. If she sensed any risk to her siblings, she might disappear with them before anyone could intervene. He leaned against a metal pillar and rubbed his hands together, trying to think. The wind howled through the broken windows of the warehouse, and he could hear the children inside settling down. After a while, he peeked in again. The girl was tucking the youngest child into a small nest of blankets. She brushed the child's hair gently and hummed a soft tune. Her voice was shaky but comforting. The other children curled up around the lantern, drifting into sleep one by one. The girl stayed awake, sitting against the wall with her arms wrapped around her knees. She stared at the dim light as though trying to stay alert, as though she didn't feel safe enough to sleep yet. The man felt something heavy settle on him. He had everything in life: money, comfort, security, but he had never seen courage like this. He had never seen someone so young carry so much. He stood there for a long time, wrestling with what to do. At last, he stepped forward and gently knocked on the metal door. The sound was soft, but in the quiet room, it echoed. The girl jumped up instantly, fear flashing across her face. She moved quickly in front of the children, shielding them, even in their sleep. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice small but steady. The man hesitated. He didn't want to frighten her, but he couldn't step away now. It's just me," he said softly. "I'm sorry. I don't want to scare you." She didn't open the door. "Why are you here?" He took a slow breath. "I saw you outside the restaurant. I followed you because I was worried. I didn't expect this. I'm sorry if I scared you." "I didn't mean to." There was a long pause. Inside the room, he heard the soft shuffle of the girl's feet, like she was deciding whether to trust him or not. "Did anyone send you?" she asked. "No," he answered. "No one sent me. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Another pause. Then the door opened, just enough for her face to appear. She studied him cautiously, her eyes sharp and guarded. The man held his hands up to show he meant no harm. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If someone sees you, they'll think we're causing trouble." "You're not causing trouble," he said gently. "You're surviving. That's not the same thing." Her eyes softened just a little, but fear still lingered. "What do you want?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nothing. I just want to help." She bit her lip. People don't help without wanting something. The honesty in her voice cut deep. He didn't blame her for thinking that way. Life had clearly taught her to protect what little she had. "I understand why you feel that way," he said quietly. "You don't have to trust me. Just let me bring some food. You don't have to tell me anything. You don't have to let me in. Just let me help from outside the door, if that makes you feel safe." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she asked, "Why do you care?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He didn't know how to explain it without sounding dramatic, but he tried anyway. "Because it's cold. Because you're young. Because those kids shouldn't be sleeping on a floor in the dark. Because I saw the way you gave away food even when you were hungry. Because someone should care." Her eyes widened slightly at his last sentence. As if she hadn't heard words like that in a long time, the children behind her shifted, one of them waking up and calling her name softly. She glanced back at them, her face filled with responsibility. When she turned to him again, her expression had changed. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't pushing him away either. "Okay," she whispered. "Just don't tell anyone yet, please." He nodded. "I won't, but I'll be back with food. Warm food. Enough for all of you." She lowered her eyes, unsure, but didn't argue. As he stepped back from the door, she slowly closed it again, leaving only the faint light shining through the gaps. He walked away from the warehouse, his mind heavy. He didn't know how he was going to fix this situation, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't leave them like that. Not after what he had seen. That night, as the cold deepened and the wind grew stronger, he made a silent promise to himself. Tomorrow, their lives would begin to change. He didn't know how big the change would be, or how long it would take, but he was determined. And for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a purpose that mattered beyond business or success. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The next morning started long before the sun came up. The man barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the girl sitting against the cold wall, her shoulders shaking as she pretended not to be freezing. He saw the children curled up around the lantern, trusting her completely, because she was the only real protection they had. And each time his mind replayed the scene, He woke up with the same tight feeling in his chest. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't the type to jump into strangers' lives or make emotional decisions. His success came from logic, planning, and staying calm. But this situation wasn't something he could ignore. What he had seen wasn't a temporary struggle, it was survival. Real survival. Before dawn, he got dressed, grabbed his car keys, and headed out. He stopped at the first open diner and bought warm meals, several of them packed in insulated bags. He bought fruit, bottles of water, bread, and a few simple snacks that kids usually liked. He didn't want to bring too much all at once. He didn't want to scare them or make it seem like he was trying to control anything. He just wanted them to eat something real. On the way to the warehouse, the city was quiet. Streetlights flickered above empty sidewalks. A few early workers moved slowly across the streets. Everything looked calm, but his thoughts were anything but calm. He parked a short distance from the warehouse, careful not to draw attention. The sky was still dark, but thin light was beginning to stretch across it. He walked through the old fence and made his way toward the building. Before knocking, he listened. Inside, he heard soft footsteps, like someone moving slowly to avoid waking others. Then the girl's voice, whispering gently to the children as they stirred awake. He knocked softly. There was a pause. Then her voice, cautious but familiar. "Who is it?" "It's me," he said quietly. "I brought breakfast." Another pause. He heard the children whispering, asking who it was. The girl must have signaled them to stay quiet, because everything went still again. Then the door opened a small crack. She looked out, her eyes tired but alert. When she saw the bags in his hands, her expression changed, not relaxed, but softer, like she wanted to believe he meant well. "You came back," she whispered. "I said I would," he replied. She hesitated, and then stepped aside just enough for him to set the bags on the floor. "You can put them here, but please don't come in." "I won't," he promised. He placed the bags gently, just inside the doorway, not crossing the threshold. She watched him closely, protective but not hostile. "These are warm meals," he said softly. "Eggs, toast, a little fruit, and some water." Her eyes widened slightly at the word warm. He noticed the way her shoulders dropped, just a little, as if she'd been carrying something heavy all night. "Thank you," she whispered. She crouched down and pulled the bags closer. One of the younger children peeked from behind her blanket and whispered, "Is that breakfast?" The girl smiled at the child, a real smile, even if it was small. "Yes. Go wake the others." The children stirred, excitement buzzing through them. The girl kept the door partially closed, but she didn't shut it all the way. It was her way of showing she didn't see him as a threat, not fully. But not entirely safe either. "I'll be back later with more," he said. "You don't have to," she replied, but it wasn't a rejection. It was her trying not to rely on someone she barely knew. "I know," he said, "but I want to." It was the first time she looked at him without fear or suspicion. She didn't smile, but something gentle passed through her expression. As he stepped back, she slowly closed the door. He heard the soft sounds of children opening containers, gasps of surprise, laughter, and the girl softly telling them to sit down and eat carefully so nothing spilled. He didn't leave right away. He walked back to his car and sat inside, trying to think clearly. He could keep bringing food, but food wasn't enough. They couldn't keep living in a cold warehouse with broken windows and no heat. Something had to be done, but he knew that if he rushed things, the girl might panic and disappear with the children. He had to move carefully, so he went back to his daily routine. But everything felt different. At work, he sat in meetings, but barely heard anything. His assistants handed him paperwork, and he signed without reading the first few pages. His mind kept returning to the girl, her quiet bravery, and the frightened look in her eyes when he first knocked on the door. By afternoon, he made up his mind. He gathered blankets, warm clothes, more food and water. Not too much, just enough to make the night easier. He also picked up some small toys and coloring books. He knew the kids had nothing to distract them besides each other. When he returned to the warehouse, the sky had turned orange with sunset. The area was almost completely silent. He approached the door and knocked lightly. This time the girl opened the door more quickly. She wasn't smiling, but she didn't look afraid either. She looked tired, so tired that for a moment he wondered how long she had been living like this. "You came again," she said quietly. "I brought a few things," he replied, holding up the bags. She stepped aside enough for him to set everything inside, then checked through the items, her eyes scanning the blankets and clothes with a mix of relief and disbelief. "You shouldn't do all this," she whispered, but her voice cracked slightly. He shook his head. "You shouldn't be taking care of all this alone." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "I don't have a choice." The children ran to her, pulling at the blankets and toys. Their excitement filled the small room with warmth it had never known. The youngest clung to the girl's leg, waving a tiny stuffed toy in the air. The girl knelt down and hugged the child, her expression softening. The man watched quietly from outside the doorway. He wasn't sure whether he should leave or stay. Finally, the girl stood up and looked at him again. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied. "Why do you care so much?" "You don't know us." He paused, thinking. He didn't want to make himself sound like a hero he wasn't. "Maybe it's because no one helped me when I needed it," he said honestly. "Maybe because I can't stand the thought of kids sleeping on a cold floor. Maybe because—" He took a breath. "Because I saw how strong you are, and I couldn't walk away from that." She blinked slowly, processing his words. "You don't owe me anything," he added. "I'm not trying to take control or make decisions for you. I just want you and the kids to be safe." Her eyes softened again. "I know. I can tell." He was surprised she said that. It was the closest she had come to trusting him. The children called her name again, wanting her attention. She turned to them, her voice gentle as she helped them unfold their new blankets. The man waited for a moment, then said, "Can I ask you something too?" She looked back at him and nodded. "How long have you been here?" Her gaze dropped. Her fingers twisted nervously. "A while." "That building." "It isn't safe," he said carefully. "I know," she replied quietly. "But it's all we have." After our mom passed, everything happened fast. People came to take us to different places. They wanted to split us up. She swallowed hard. I couldn't let that happen. So we left. His heart sank. "You've been taking care of them alone?" She nodded. "They're my family. I can't let them get separated. I promised my mom I'd look after them." The weight of her words settled between them. She wasn't just surviving, she was carrying a responsibility far too big for her age. He stepped closer to the door, still careful not to cross the line. "There are safe places where your brothers and sisters can stay together. I can help you find one." She stiffened instantly. "No, they'll take us away from each other. I can't risk it." He held up his hands. "Okay, I understand. I won't push you. But please let me help in other ways. Food, clothes, warmth, nothing more unless you want it." She studied him again, her eyes tense, weighing every word. Finally, she nodded. "Okay." It wasn't a big word, but it felt huge. It was the beginning of trust. He visited daily after that. Not for long periods, just enough to bring what they needed and check that they were safe. Sometimes he brought warm meals. Sometimes books. Sometimes extra blankets. The children grew more comfortable around him. They started waving when they heard his knock, shouting excitedly. The girl remained cautious, but she no longer hid her appreciation. She let him hand things directly to her. She let him stand inside the doorway for a moment before closing it. She even let him talk to the children while she watched quietly one evening. When he brought dinner, she stepped outside the door to speak with him. "You've done a lot for us," she said. "I know you don't want anything back, but I still want to say thank you." He nodded gently. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad you're eating real meals." She looked down. "The kids keep asking if we're moving soon. They think you're going to find us a house." He chuckled softly. "I wish I could fix everything that fast." She looked up again, her eyes serious. "Would you actually help us move?" "Not today. Not tomorrow. But someday?" He felt something shift inside him. A quiet promise. A silent commitment. "Yes," he said. Whenever you're ready, she nodded. For the first time, she didn't look frightened. She looked hopeful, and in that moment, he knew he wasn't just helping strangers. He was becoming part of their story. He didn't know where this path would lead, or how hard the journey ahead might be. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't walking away. Daniel stood inside the old warehouse, trying his best not to look too shocked by what he had walked into. The cold air bit at his skin, but what struck him more was the sight of the children watching him with wide, unsure eyes. Some hid behind torn blankets. Others peeked from behind old boxes, as if they were used to strangers being dangerous. Lena stayed in front of them, her small frame tense, her jaw tight, her hands trembling just enough for him to notice. She didn't move. She didn't run. She simply stood between him and the children like a shield. He raised his hands slowly, showing he had nothing to hide. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said quietly. His voice was calm, gentle, almost slow enough to match the stillness of the room. Lena's breath came out in small puffs of white smoke from the cold. She stared at him, unsure whether to believe him. He could see she was exhausted, scared, and protective, but he also saw something else: strength. A strength most adults didn't have. "You followed me?" she finally said, her voice low but steady. "Why?" Her question held more weight than it seemed. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a warning. "Give me the right answer, or I take my family and run." Daniel nodded softly. "I did, but only because you looked like you needed help. I didn't want to scare you. I'm sorry if I did." The children glanced at one another, unsure if they should trust his tone. One of the smaller boys tugged at Lena's sleeve and whispered something. She gently squeezed his hand without looking away from Daniel. "You don't know me," she said. "You don't know them." "I know enough," he replied. "Enough to see that you've been carrying a weight no kid should ever have to carry, and that you're doing everything you can to protect them. I'm not here to take them away from you. I just want to help." Lena hesitated. The silence hung heavy between them. Every small sound, the wind hitting the broken windows, the distant hum of traffic, even the soft breathing of the children, felt louder than it should. Daniel slowly reached into his coat pocket. Lena tensed again, but he carefully pulled out wrapped sandwiches, warm pastries, and brothers and sisters, find something better than this. A real home. A place where you don't have to worry about waking up cold or hungry. Lena looked at the floor. The idea of a home sounded almost too good to believe. "Is it far away?" "It doesn't have to be," he said. "It can be right here in the city. Somewhere safe. Somewhere close to school and doctors and everything you'll need." She bit her lip. "But would they take us all together?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "No one will break your family apart. I've already spoken to the people in charge. They understand that you're the one who has kept everyone safe all this time." She looked at him with wide, unsure eyes. "You talked to them? About us?" "I did," he said kindly. "Only good things." Lena didn't know how to respond. No adult had ever spoken kindly about her before, not without wanting something. After a moment, she asked, "Why do you care this much? You could have walked away." Daniel took a slow breath. "I could have. But I didn't want to. You deserve a chance at a better life. All of you do." She looked like she didn't know how to accept that answer. But she didn't argue either. The children began to stir, rubbing their eyes as the smell of breakfast reached them. One by one they sat up, blinking in confusion at the soft beds and warm light. The youngest crawled into Lena's lap immediately, still half asleep. Daniel smiled as they gathered around the tray. He helped pass out plates and cups, careful not to rush anyone. The kids ate slowly, savoring each bite as if not sure when the next warm meal would come. But this time they didn't have to worry. After breakfast, the shelter workers arrived to talk about the next steps. They explained everything gently, using simple words so the younger kids could understand too. They talked about housing programs, support services, and how Lena would get a say in every decision. Lena stayed close to her siblings the whole time. Her arm wrapped around the little ones, but she listened carefully. She asked questions, and for the first time she allowed herself to hope. Later in the afternoon, Daniel took them to see a small house that had become available through a local program. Clean, warm, with enough rooms for everyone. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. It had real beds, working lights, and a kitchen that didn't leak. The moment the children stepped inside, their eyes lit up. They touched the walls, tested the doors, bounced gently on the couches, as if trying to see if everything was real. One of the girls whispered, "We get to stay here?" Lena looked at Daniel before answering. He nodded softly. "If you like it." Lena ran her fingers over the window frame, feeling the warmth coming from the heater below it. "It's nice," she said quietly. "It's yours," Daniel replied. "As long as you want it." Tears formed in her eyes, but she wiped them quickly, not wanting the kids to worry. "Thank you," she whispered. That evening, as the sun began to set, the workers brought bags of clothes, blankets, toiletries, and groceries. The house slowly filled with signs of real life, a stack of bowls on the counter, towels in the bathroom. Shoes by the door, Lena stood in the middle of the living room, taking it all in. The children were exploring each room, laughing softly. Not loud laughter, but the kind that comes from trying not to disturb something precious. Daniel watched them from the doorway. He didn't say anything at first. He just let them experience the moment. When Lena walked over to him, she seemed smaller than before, more vulnerable. "This is the first time they've had their own beds," she said. He nodded gently. "I know." She looked at him with a seriousness far beyond her years. "You changed everything." "No," he said. "You did." "I just helped a little." She didn't argue, but she didn't fully believe him either. Over the next few weeks, their lives slowly shifted into something that resembled normal. The children enrolled in school, visited doctors for checkups, and learned how to sleep through the night without waking from the cold. Lena met with counselors and teachers who supported her instead of criticizing her. She returned to school too, catching up quickly despite having missed so much. Daniel visited often, but never in a way that made them dependent on him. He brought groceries sometimes, helped with homework when the older kids struggled, and showed up to check on them because he genuinely cared. He didn't act like a hero. He wasn't trying to replace anyone. He simply became someone stable, something they had never had before. One afternoon, after a meeting at school, Lena approached him outside the building. "I'm good at numbers," she said shyly. "My teacher said I'm one of the best in the class." Daniel smiled warmly. "I'm not surprised at all. You smart? You've been solving problems your whole life." She looked down at her shoes. "I want to learn more. I want to get really good. Maybe one day I can help people too." "You will," he said with certainty. "I know you will." That night, he gave her a small gift, not something expensive, but something meaningful. A simple notebook with clean pages and a pen. "For your ideas," he said, "and your future plans." She held the notebook as if it were made of gold. "I've never had one just for me, now you do." Weeks turned into months, and the family continued to grow stronger. The kids laughed more. Lena slept better. Their home became filled with drawings, school papers, and shoes scattered near the front door. One evening, the youngest climbed onto Daniel's lap and said, "Are you staying for dinner?" Daniel laughed gently. "Only if your sister says it's okay." Lena smiled, a real, relaxed smile. "You can stay." As they ate together, the house filled with warmth that had nothing to do with the heater. It was warmth built from safety, trust, and a future they finally believed in. Lena looked around the table, watching her siblings talk with their mouths full, laughing over nothing at all. Her eyes softened as she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to think before. They were safe. They were home. And for the first time, she wasn't carrying everything alone. Daniel caught her gaze across the table. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Lena gave him a small nod, quiet promise that she would make the most of this chance, and he nodded back. A promise that he would be there if she ever needed him. Their story had started in the cold, on a lonely street where a hungry girl asked a stranger for scraps, but it ended here in a warm home, with full plates, hopeful hearts, and a future finally within reach.